The hum of engines outside the airport windows mixed with the chatter of restless travelers. Camila stood at the gate, boarding pass in hand, her heart steady but hopeful. Suddenly, the staff member at the counter raised her voice, loud enough for everyone in the waiting area to hear. "She doesn't belong in first class." The words hit like a slap, drawing eyes from all corners. A man with a newspaper lowered it to smirk. A young couple exchanged a laugh, shaking their heads. Even the sharp scent of coffee from the nearby kiosk seemed to burn hotter as the humiliation spread through the air. Camila's fingers tightened around the thin paper of her ticket. Her lips pressed shut. She did not argue, did not explain. The crowd's laughter echoed, but her silence held something stronger. Why wasn't she fighting back? What was she hiding? I kept my eyes lowered, but my silence wasn't weakness. It was memory. Because this wasn't the first time I had been told I didn't belong. Growing up, I was the daughter of a mechanic in a quiet Midwestern town. The smell of oil and grease clung to my father's hands, and neighbors used to call us the family of wrenches. My classmates snickered when I wore second-hand shoes, and teachers overlooked me when praise was given. Respect, it seemed, was reserved for others. Even later, when I earned a job as a flight attendant to support my family, I was still underestimated. Some passengers spoke down to me, treating me like invisible help. I smiled through it, but every careless word carved deep. And then there was Richard. He was at the gate today too, sharp suit, polished shoes, and a voice that never missed a chance to belittle. He once lived down the street from me, but success had swelled his pride. He was the one whispering to the staff now, his tone dripping with mockery. "She probably bought the wrong ticket," he said loudly enough for the rows behind him to laugh. But what Richard and the others didn't know was that while I once served drinks in narrow aisles, I had spent years studying in silence, pushing myself through sleepless nights, hidden exams, and endless training. My journey had been long, heavy, and private. I remembered those late evenings after work, walking home under the orange glow of street lamps, repeating lessons to myself while the world rested. I remembered the humiliation of failing my first test in aeronautics, and the grit it took to try again. Every failure became a stone, and I built a tower of them, climbing higher, quietly, until I reached a view no one expected. Now, as the airport staff pointed at me and Richard smirked at the crowd, I felt that same old sting of disrespect. But under it was something sharper, the knowledge of who I had become, and the quiet power I carried. The crowd saw only a woman too modestly dressed for their standards. Richard saw only the girl from the neighborhood who never had enough. What they couldn't see, not yet, was the truth waiting to step out from behind those heavy glass doors, and I wondered, almost with a smile, how long would their laughter last? The staff member tapped the counter sharply, her voice climbing. "Ma'am, please step aside. Others are waiting." Her words weren't just instructions, they were dismissal. A ripple of chuckles rolled through the waiting area. Richard leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs with exaggerated ease. "First class isn't charity, Camila," he said, raising his voice just enough. "Maybe next time you'll know your place." His laugh was smooth, practiced, and cruel. The sting burned, but I held steady. I could feel dozens of eyes pressing against me, strangers who didn't know me, yet already decided I was out of place. A mother with her teenage daughter whispered, both of them smiling in pity. A man in a business suit shook his head like he was watching a scene from a play he'd already guessed the ending of, but they were wrong. I adjusted my scarf slowly, taking a deep breath. My silence unsettled them. Whispers began to float through the air. "Why isn't she arguing? Why is she just standing there?" Richard smirked wider, sensing his stage. He stood up, gesturing to me as if he were addressing an audience. "You see, folks, some people think they can just walk into places they don't belong." His hand swept toward me like I was an exhibit. A few passengers chuckled, one man even clapping softly at the performance. I let the moment stretch, my heartbeat steady. I thought of the long nights of study, the sacrifices, the endless hours behind locked doors where no one saw my progress. Those memories became armor. I lifted my chin, just slightly. My eyes met Richard's. I didn't speak, but the calmness in my gaze seemed to trouble him. For the first time, his grin faltered. The staff member cleared her throat, trying to regain control. "If you don't have the right boarding pass, ma'am, we'll have to ask you to leave the gate area." Her voice was firm, but her eyes flickered. There was doubt there now. The laughter in the crowd softened into murmurs. Something about my stillness unsettled them. They couldn't place it, but they felt it. I wasn't panicked. I wasn't flustered. I was waiting, and just as Richard opened his mouth to mock me again, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the jet bridge. A shadow stretched across the floor, growing longer with each stride. The conversations hushed. The crowd shifted in their seats. Someone important was approaching. The hush fell so suddenly it was as if the entire terminal took a breath together. The footsteps grew louder until the figure emerged from the jet bridge, tall, confident, wearing the crisp navy uniform that needed no introduction. The pilot, his cap glinted under the bright airport lights as he stopped at the gate. The staff member straightened immediately, her earlier firmness evaporating. Richard froze mid-smirk, his jaw slack. The pilot's eyes swept the crowd once, then settled directly on me. "Camila," he said, his voice strong but carrying warmth. "Why are you standing here? You should already be on board." A murmur rippled through the waiting area. People shifted in their seats, exchanging confused glances. The staff member stammered, "Yes, sir, she presented this ticket, but..." The pilot raised his hand, silencing her. Then he turned to the crowd, his voice resonant. "Ladies and gentlemen, this woman doesn't need a boarding pass check. She is not just a passenger." He took a step closer, and I felt every eye swing toward me. "She is the newly appointed chief safety inspector for this airline. The one who ensures I fly safely. If she doesn't board, this plane doesn't leave." The silence was thunderous. Even the hum of vending machines seemed to pause. I lifted my gaze, finally meeting Richard's stunned eyes. His skin drained of color. The laugh he'd been holding turned into a stiff swallow. The man who had strutted only moments earlier now looked like a schoolboy caught cheating in class. A child clutched her mother's sleeve and whispered, "She's the boss." The mother only nodded, wide-eyed. The staff member's hands trembled as she quickly stepped aside. "Of course, ma'am. Right this way." But the pilot wasn't finished. He looked back at Richard, his face stern. "And for the record, when someone dedicates their life to aviation safety, they deserve respect, not laughter." Gasps broke out. A woman near the window covered her mouth. Another man muttered, "Unbelievable," as he glanced with disgust at Richard, the pilot. Then turned to me, softening. "Camila, come with me. First class is waiting." He extended his arm, and with that, I stepped forward. Not rushing, not boasting. Just walking past rows of stunned faces, each one reflecting their own quiet shame. Richard's eyes followed, frozen. His pride stripped bare. The carpeted floor of the jet bridge softened beneath my steps as I walked beside the pilot. But before disappearing into the aircraft, I glanced back one final time. The waiting area was silent, a sea of faces holding one shared emotion, regret. Richard sat stiffly in his chair, his polished shoes now seeming almost too shiny, too desperate. His smirk was gone, replaced with a pale stillness. For years, he had fed on belittling others, confident that no one could challenge him. But in this moment, stripped of laughter and applause, he was nothing more than a man caught in his own arrogance. The staff member shifted uncomfortably, her cheeks flushed red as she pretended to shuffle papers. She couldn't meet my eyes. The passengers who had chuckled earlier now avoided looking my way altogether. The same people who had been quick to join Richard's laughter were now silent witnesses to his humiliation. I didn't need to say a word. My silence was enough. The pilot guided me into the cabin, and the scent of polished leather and fresh linen greeted me as we stepped into first class. Passengers turned their heads curiously, but their expressions softened as they noticed the way the crew greeted me. Respect lingered in the air like perfume, warm and undeniable. As I settled into the wide seat, the pilot gave me a nod before returning to the cockpit. The cabin door closed with a gentle thud, and the outside world seemed to fade away. I looked out the window, watching the runway lights flicker like stars. A quiet smile touched my lips, not of pride, but of peace. My journey had never been about showing off. It had been about proving, first to myself and then to the world, that dignity and perseverance could outlast mockery. Behind me, Richard would sit in his narrow seat, the echo of his laughter replaced by the sound of silence. Perhaps he would think twice before speaking carelessly again. Perhaps not. But his arrogance had met its end in front of an entire crowd, and for me, the lesson was simple. True respect cannot be handed out by others. It must be earned, lived, and carried quietly, until the moment it speaks louder than any insult, because in the end, arrogance fades. But dignity endures. Moral respect always flies higher than pride.